Picture this for a second. You are standing at the head of a conference room. Or, I mean, maybe you're just staring at a grid of faces on a video call.
Right. The classic blank stares on a video call.
Exactly. And you have just finished presenting this flawless, data-backed, totally bulletproof plan to 12 people. I mean, the logic is airtight, the slides are immaculate.
You've really put the work in.
You really have. And as you wrap up your pitch, you look around the room, and what do you see? You see them all nodding. Politely, they are agreeing with you.
Which feels great in the moment.
Oh, it feels amazing. You log off feeling like an absolute champion.
Yeah.
And then, 3 weeks go by and absolutely nothing has changed. Zero momentum.
Yeah, that is a painfully universal experience. You secured the polite nod in the room, but you didn't actually secure the behavior change in the real world.
Right. And that's exactly why we're here. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're dissecting the anatomy of team buy-in. We have some incredible source material focused on high-value corporate English and change management, and we're going to look at exactly why that passive, polite nodding kills projects.
It really is a project killer.
It is. So our mission today is to unpack the exact psychological triggers and honestly, the specific vocabulary you need to transform a quiet room into an actively committed team. Because there is a massive difference between a team that simply hears your idea and a team that actually moves because of it.
There really is. And, the fundamental error we make when a plan fails to launch after 3 weeks is misdiagnosing the problem.
How do you mean?
Well, we usually assume it was a logic problem. We sit at our desks and think, oh, maybe I didn't present the data clearly enough. Or maybe they didn't understand that bar chart on slide 4.
Right. We blame the presentation.
Exactly. But people don't commit to organizational changes just because the argument is airtight. I mean, they commit because they understand their place in the new reality and because they feel like they are actively shaping the direction rather than just acting as passive recipients of a mandate.
Yeah, which brings us to this really interesting concept from our sources today. It's called performed agreement. And, I mean, we've all seen this. A lot of us are probably guilty of doing it ourselves.
Oh, absolutely.
Because in corporate environments, and heavily across different global cultures too, visible disagreement in a group setting is actively avoided. It's perceived as rude or, politically risky.
Yeah, rocking the boat is dangerous.
Exactly. So silence in a room is often mistaken for agreement, when in reality, it's just a suppressed objection.
And that makes the quiet room arguably the most dangerous room in change management.
The most dangerous room. Wow.
Yeah, because when you present a major operational shift and the room goes completely quiet, it is incredibly tempting to think it's because they're experiencing genuine processing.
Like they're just awestruck by your brilliance.
Right. You tell yourself, oh, they're just absorbing the brilliance of the strategy. But almost invariably, it is suppressed resistance. The problem is you just can't tell the difference from the outside looking in.
It makes me think of checking the terms and conditions box when you download a new app on your phone.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right, because you scroll rapidly to the bottom, you click, I agree, just to get through the friction of the process and get to the thing you actually want to do. You aren't genuinely committing to reading 50 pages of legal text.
No one ever reads it.
No one. You are performing agreement just to end the interaction. And that is exactly what teams are doing when they just nod politely at your presentation. They are clicking agree to exit the meeting.
That is spot on. They are clicking agree to get out of the room. But that performed agreement costs you dearly during implementation. When you don't surface the resistance early, you get this phenomenon of wading through sand.
Let's talk about that for a second. What does that sand actually look like in a day-to-day corporate setting? Because it's rarely outright rebellion, is it?
No, it's rarely overt defiance. People aren't flipping tables. The sand is, it's the sudden spike in unreturned emails.
Oh, yeah.
It's the endless requests for further clarification on things you've already explained 3 times. It's the sudden, mysterious inability to locate key documents.
Just dragging their feet on everything.
Exactly. It's all these micro-frictions that slow a rollout to a crawl. And almost all of it stems from how leaders traditionally end their pitches. They use that classic conversation-killing phrase.
Let me guess. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes. Does anyone have any questions?
Oh, man, I am so guilty of that one. Any questions? And then just crickets. You wait 5 uncomfortable seconds and say, great, moving on.
Right. And you've learned nothing about what they actually think.
So if that phrase is a dead end, we need a better entry point. And this is where the specific vocabulary from our source material really shines. Instead of asking for generic questions, you say, and this is a quote, "Before I ask for reactions, I want to acknowledge what this changes for you."
The sequencing of that phrase is just brilliant.
Why is that?
Well, when you just ask for questions, without first acknowledging the human reality of the change, the room hears that you just want quick confirmation so you can end the meeting.
Like you're just checking a box.
Exactly. But by saying, "I want to acknowledge what this changes for you," you are signaling that you know this isn't neutral news. You aren't wearing rose-colored glasses, pretending it's business as usual.
And mechanically, this works because you have to actually name the specific losses, right? You can't just throw out a platitude like, "Oh, I know change is happening," and that stuff.
No, you have to be specific.
Right. So let's look at a concrete example from the deep dive sources. Say a company is centralizing its regional reporting structure. You don't just say things are changing. You say, "I want to acknowledge what this changes for you, the local authority you've built up over the years, your direct reporting lines, and the speed at which you can make decisions on the ground."
You explicitly name the pain points.
Yes.
And the underlying psychology of why that works is crucial.
Yeah.
When people are faced with structural change, their amygdala, the threat detection center of the brain, it just lights up.
It's a survival response.
Exactly. But by naming their specific losses accurately, you actually lower that threat response. You prove that you possess cognitive empathy. You demonstrate that you understand exactly what this costs them, not just what the broader organization is gaining.
That makes so much sense.
And in that exact moment, the people in the room decide whether you are someone they can trust with their honest reaction.
Okay, so you've built that initial bridge. You've proved you aren't completely detached from their reality. But people are still going to be guarded, right? They still don't want to be the one to stick their neck out.
Of course not. It's risky.
So how do we actually pull that resistance out into the open?
Well, you have to explicitly invite the friction. You have to make it safe to disagree.
Which brings us to a really fascinating phrase, and I want you listening to write this one down. Instead of asking if there are concerns, you look at the room and say, "I want to hear the version of this that worries you most."
I want to hear the version of this that worries you most. It is just a brilliantly constructed piece of corporate vocabulary.
It really is.
Because by asking for the version that worries them most, you are fundamentally changing the rules of engagement. You are no longer asking if they have anxiety, which implies there's a correct answer of not having any. You are assuming the anxiety exists as a baseline reality.
It signals a few things simultaneously, doesn't it? It says, "I know this is uncomfortable. I believe your anxiety is completely legitimate. And most importantly, I am explicitly asking for it because I have the capacity as a leader to handle the absolute worst-case scenario."
Precisely. You are demonstrating supreme confidence in your plan by being willing to subject it to a stress test in real time.
But, okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
Doesn't directly asking for the worst-case scenario run a huge risk? If you literally ask a room full of stressed people what worries them most, aren't you just handing them a microphone to turn the meeting into a giant complaining session? I mean, it feels like you're inviting them to derail the entire project before it even starts.
Yeah, and that is a very natural fear for a leader to have. We are completely conditioned to avoid conflict. But the data points in the exact opposite direction. If we look at McKinsey research on large-scale corporate change programs, the numbers are striking. Initiatives where employees actually report feeling heard, where their concerns are actively consulted, they are 3.5 times more likely to succeed.
Wait, really? 3.5 times? That's not just a marginal improvement.
No, it's massive. That's the difference between total failure and massive success.
Wow.
The goal here isn't to dodge the objection. The goal is to surface it so you can reframe it. The conversation you have in that room, that is the implementation. If you avoid the fear now, it doesn't magically disappear. It just goes underground and turns into that wading through sand fiction we talked about earlier.
Okay, so let's walk through this. Let's say you use the phrase, "You ask for what worries them most," and someone in the room inevitably takes the bait and they give you their worst case scenario.
Right.
They say, "I'm worried the centralized reporting structure will completely destroy our ability to move fast locally and we're going to lose clients."
A very valid fear.
Right. What is the immediate response? Because the natural human instinct is to immediately get defensive. You want to protect your plan. You want to jump in and say, no, 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 you're misunderstanding the flow chart. We thought of that. It'll be fine.
Yeah, which completely shuts them down and proves they were right to stay quiet in the first place. You haven't actually heard them. You've just counter-argued them.
Right. You've just defended yourself.
Exactly. So to prevent that defensive reflex, you use a specific response to reframe their objection. When they share that fear, you say, that is exactly the kind of thing I needed to hear. Help me understand it more.
Oh, that is a complete psychological judo move. You are taking their defensive energy, their anxiety, and instead of pushing against it, you are pulling it into the planning process.
You're using their momentum.
Yes. By saying that is exactly the kind of thing I needed to hear, you are totally validating them.
Yes, and you instantly turn a potential disruptor into a contributor. You are signaling that their concern isn't an obstacle to the plan, it's vital intelligence for the plan.
It just changes the entire dynamic of the room.
Completely. The individual goes from defending a cynical position to actively problem-solving with you.
Okay, so at this point, the dynamic is shifting. The team is sharing their fears, they feel validated, and they are engaged. But we run into a very real structural problem here.
What's that?
How do you incorporate their input without completely undoing the business decision that executive leadership already locked in? I mean, you can't just throw out the entire centralization plan because the regional leads don't like it. You have a mandate to execute.
Yeah, this is the ultimate tightrope walk of change management. And it is where we see leaders constantly fall into one of two traps.
Okay, what's the first trap?
The first trap is pretending a closed decision is still open for debate. If leadership has already decided on centralization, and you run a workshop pretending the team can vote on whether or not to centralize, you're creating a fake democracy.
Oh, that's terrible.
It is, and you will destroy all of your credibility the moment they realize their input was a sham.
Yeah, nobody likes being patronized with a fake vote. So that's the first trap. What's the second?
The second trap is the exact opposite. It's presenting a fully baked, rigid plan with absolutely zero room for input on any detail.
A dictatorship, basically.
Right. That authoritarian approach is exactly what produces the quiet room of performed agreement. You need a middle ground between fake democracy and a dictatorship. And that leads to a critical phrase from our deep dive. You say, the what has been decided, but the how is still open.
The what has been decided, but the how is still open. I really like that framing. It reminds me of telling your family that you were moving to a new city.
Oh, so?
Well, the move itself, that's the what. It is a closed decision. We are moving to Chicago, and that isn't up for debate. But which neighborhood we look at, what kind of house we want, which schools we target, that is the how, and that is completely open for the family to decide together.
That analogy captures the mechanics perfectly. You are offering genuine agency, but within a fixed, non-negotiable constraint. If we go back to the regional reporting example, the centralization itself, the move to Chicago, in your analogy, is happening. That is the what? But the escalation framework, defining exactly which daily decisions stay local versus which specific approvals have to go to the center, that is the how.
Okay, I see.
And you look at those regional leads and say, you are the experts on the ground. You're going to build that framework.
And the reason that works is ownership psychology, isn't it? People always commit to things they help build.
100%.
Like if I picked the neighborhood we moved to, I'm going to defend living there when things get tough. If I built the escalation framework, I'm going to make sure that framework actually succeeds because my fingerprints are on it.
Precisely. You are inviting the people who actually know the day-to-day work better than anyone else to help design the tactical implementation. It not only makes the psychological buy-in infinitely stronger, it almost always makes the actual implementation structurally better.
That makes a ton of sense. So we've navigated the initial fear, we've defined the boundaries of what they can control, and the team is now actively helping design the rollout of the how.
We're in a good spot.
We are in a great spot, but we aren't done yet. The meeting is wrapping up. At this point, the instinct is probably just to say, great meeting, thanks everyone, and run out of the room before they change their minds.
Take the win and run.
Exactly. But I'm guessing that leaves the commitment too vague. How do we actually measure if they've shifted from fear to commitment before they walk out the door? We need to make sure we aren't slipping right back into a performed agreement.
To do that, you have to move the room from a state of mere comfort to a state of genuine confidence.
Right.
And there's a massive operational distinction between the two.
We need to test the temperature of the room. And the phrase for that from our sources, what would you need to feel genuinely confident about this, not just comfortable with it?
Let's break down why that distinction matters so much. Comfort is passive. When someone tells you they are comfortable with a plan, it usually just means they have stopped arguing.
Yeah, they're just exhausted.
Right. They've reached a point where they will tolerate it. Confidence, on the other hand, is active. It means they actually believe the mechanism will work, and they are prepared to expend political capital and energy to act on that belief.
And most buy-in conversations stop at comfort.
Yes, which is exactly why the implementation stalls out 3 weeks later.
I see the power in that, but I have to point out a cultural and hierarchical nuance here that feels a bit tricky.
Okay, let's hear it.
If I'm a project manager and I'm talking to a senior executive or, someone way above my pay grade in a strict corporate hierarchy, asking them, what do you need to be confident, could easily backfire.
That's a fair point.
It sounds presumptuous. It almost implies they lack confidence or don't know what they are doing. It could land as insulting rather than collaborative.
That is a very astute observation. The register of your language matters immensely depending on who is in the room. If you are operating within a formal hierarchy or a culture where questioning emotional states is taboo, you can pivot to a safer alternative that achieves the exact same mechanical goal.
Okay, what's the pivot?
Instead of asking about confidence, you ask, is there anything that would make this easier to move forward on?
Okay. Easier to move forward on. That feels much safer.
Right. It asks for a practical operational condition rather than probing into their internal emotional state. It flexes to fit the specific politics of the room, but the underlying principle remains identical.
You're still searching for that gap.
Exactly. You are searching for the remaining gap between polite, passive agreement and genuine active commitment.
So they give you their answer. They tell you what would make it easier to move forward on. What do we do with that information? Because if they give you a great operational insight and you just say, great point, thanks for sharing, it feels like you're just a secretary taking meeting minutes.
That is the exact danger. If you just collect the feedback and move on, you invalidate the entire exercise. You must synthesize the input using a very specific formula. You have to reflect back and connect forward.
Reflect back and connect forward. Let's unpack the mechanics of that.
The phrasing is, what I'm hearing from this room is, and here's how that shapes what happens next. If you just reflect back saying something like, I hear that you're all very worried about the Q3 timelines, but you don't connect it to an action, it feels completely empty.
It's just active listening without active doing.
Right. It feels like taking minutes without consequence. Conversely, if you only connect forward without reflecting back, saying, we're going to implement a 90-day review period, it feels like you were already going to do that anyway, and their input didn't actually matter.
So you have to tie the two together so the causality is obvious.
Exactly.
Like what I'm hearing is that local speed is your biggest concern, and here's how that shapes what happens next. This specific group is going to draft the escalation thresholds by next Tuesday. It proves they are actually heard, and it proves that being heard tangibly changed the outcome of the meeting.
And what people remember from a change management rollout is rarely the slide deck. They remember the specific moment they realized they were actually being heard.
That's a great point. Okay, we know what phrases to use to build this momentum, but we also need to spend some time on what we should absolutely avoid saying.
Oh, there are some really bad ones out there.
Yeah, there are some incredibly toxic phrases that leaders lean on when they are desperately trying to close out a messy meeting. Let's look at the cliches. The first one that always pops up is, I know change is hard.
It sounds like empathy, but it functions as dismissal.
Really?
Yeah, it is so broad and generic that it lands as patronizing. It implies that all change is universally difficult, which implicitly excuses you as the leader from having to address the specific localized difficulties of this particular change for these particular people.
It's a platitude masquerading as leadership.
Exactly. It's a total cop-out.
It's the corporate equivalent of saying it is what it is. It just shuts down the dialogue. But there's another phrase that is even worse. The ultimate corporate sin when it comes to securing buy-in is leaning on the phrase, trust the process.
Trust the process might be the most damaging 5 syllables in corporate English.
Wow, really?
Think about what you are actually asking a competent professional to do when you say that.
Yeah.
You are asking them to blindly defer to an invisible system and deliberately suspend their own hard-earned professional judgment.
Yeah, that's not great.
That is the exact opposite of building genuine commitment. It is demanding compliance.
It's so true. I'm trying to imagine being a regional director, raising a valid concern about losing clients due to a bottleneck and being told to trust the process. I would instantly feel insulted.
Because it is insulting.
Right, because if the process is actually trustworthy, you shouldn't have to demand trust like a dictator. You should be able to rationally demonstrate why it's trustworthy.
Exactly. Asking them to trust the process is a lazy substitute for making an actual argument. If the process is robust, name the safeguards. Point out the scheduled review milestones, explain exactly what the emergency valve is if things go off the rails. By demanding blind trust, you erode whatever fragile psychological safety you managed to build earlier in the meeting.
So we've avoided the toxic phrases. We haven't demanded blind trust. We haven't ended with a weak thanks everyone, let's move forward. We are at the absolute finish line of the meeting. How do we secure the bag? We need the final ask.
The final ask is where you secure the tangible investment. The phrase you use as you look around the room is, I want to go around the room, not for consensus, but for commitment. What is the one thing each of you is prepared to own in making this work?
Not for consensus, but for commitment. What is the one thing each of you is prepared to own? That is a heavy-hitting question.
It works because of the psychology of public commitment. You are forcing them to publicly name a specific stake in the ground. You aren't asking for a vague collective blessing. You are asking for their individual hand on the wheel.
That makes total sense.
When someone says out loud, in front of their peers and their boss, I will own drafting the European communication cascade, they have committed to something real. The social pressure of naming a task publicly activates a completely different level of neurological engagement than just nodding along.
But what if someone pushes back? What if you go around the room and someone just shrugs and says, I don't know yet. I'm not ready to own anything.
Then you have just discovered exactly where your remaining friction is. And finding out that someone isn't on board right now, while you are all still in the room together, is vastly better than discovering it 3 weeks into a failing implementation when they've been quietly ignoring your emails.
So if we pull all of these threads together, what does this all mean? The biggest takeaway here is that true buy-in is not a product. It's not produced by a beautiful presentation or a perfectly formatted spreadsheet. Buy-in is produced by a conversation. In fact, the conversation itself is the implementation.
That is the core insight to walk away with. If you don't have the difficult, messy, real conversation before the rollout begins, you are absolutely going to be having it during the rollout.
But by then, it's too late.
Exactly. Only then, it will take the form of delays, missed deadlines, passive-aggressive friction, and systemic resistance.
Which leads perfectly to our listener challenge for today. We've talked about a lot of theory, but I want you to test this in the real world. Think of one person in your work life right now, maybe a peer on a project team, or a key stakeholder you report to, whose agreement you suspect is only polite.
We all have someone in mind right now.
You definitely do. You think they just clicked, I agree on the terms and conditions to get off the last Zoom call. Sometime today, I want you to go ask them this single question. What would you need to feel genuinely confident about this, not just comfortable with it? Or if they're senior to you, what would make this easier to move forward on? Ask it, and then be totally quiet and listen fully to their answer.
It is a deceptively simple question, but it shifts the dynamic entirely. You are inviting them to cross the bridge from passive observation into active participation.
And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week. If you are a leader or a project manager and you constantly find yourself wading through sand dealing with endless friction and delays during project implementations, is it possible that your team isn't actually resistant to your brilliant plans?
That's the tough question.
Could it be that your own vocabulary during the kickoff failed to give them a real voice? Think back to that conference room we started with, the flawless plan, the 12 nodding heads, the 3 weeks of absolute silence. The plan itself was probably never the problem. The words you used to ask people to follow it, that was the problem.
The right words change the psychology of the room, and changing the room is the only way to change the outcome.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Try that listener challenge today and see what happens when you stop asking for polite nods and start asking for the scary, honest truth. Catch you on the next deep dive.